Hello, I'm Luke Hector from the Broken Meeple. This is a show where I rave and rant about board games, but usually more the latter. Here we are starting a trend of AEG games. AEG pretty much gave me the whole back catalogue when it came to review copies this session. I've got Nocturne, Let's Go to Japan, Undergrove, the Cascadia Roll and Rights. I'm pretty sure was there another one? Well, yeah, it's right in front of me, you doofus. Nocturne. So yeah, I've got plenty to... Oh yes, and Waffle Time. Couldn't forget that one. So, plenty to come from AEG over the next few months. And we're starting with the most requested of the lot from the viewers of the show, Nocturne. This one is from AEG and Flat Out Games. So this is the same combination that brought you Cascadia. Hell, it even uses Beth Sobel as some of the artwork. So there's definitely a lot of like, okay, is this like a sequel to it? Well, Cascadia is a very different game, okay? You know, this is one of the best gateway games in existence. It still to this day is probably a top 10 gateway game, but get it out of your heads that this is not a sequel to Cascadia. They are nothing alike in terms of how they play, okay? This is a very different game altogether. So what is Nocturne? Well, Nocturne is a game where you are bidding or casting spells, whatever, the theme means nothing here. You're effectively bidding on tiles, and those tiles score in different ways or have little triggered abilities, and effectively it's set collection. But how you bid for the tiles is based on a grid mechanic, so it's not just simply choosing a tile and I'll bid this much for it. There's a little bit more nuance than that. And then there are 2 rounds of the game where between rounds there's not only opportunities for you to get more tiles by another mechanic, but if you've got stuff left over, you can make yourself more powerful for round 2. So there's almost like a little bit of a catch-up mechanism here and there. It's not a gateway game. It is supposed to be light. You know, the box claims a 30 to 45 minute time frame, 1 to 4 players. So the question is, can AEG and Flat Out do it again? So in Nocturne, as I say, you are bidding for tiles. Now, this is set up for an example for, I believe, a 2-player game, but basically it scales based on player count. And you have a grid of tiles like so. You have a bunch of spell tokens, which is effectively your currency for bidding on various tiles. But it's not just simply a case of going, I choose this tile, right, let's all bid, see who wins. A little bit more to it than that. The idea is that you'll pick one of your spells, so let's say a low one, start with 2, choose a tile, and place it on face up. The other players then have the opportunity to outbid you, but if they outbid you, it's not just a case of going, oh, all right, I want that mushroom as well, I'm just going to, bid this. What they have to do is they have to place it on an adjacent tile. So if I decide I want to go to this one, I'll put my free on it. Therefore, I'm now trying to win this tile with a free. Where you go, well, now I can only go adjacent to that one, you know what, I wouldn't say no to that herb. I'm going to put a 5 on there. So I've outbid you, and now we're bidding for this tile, effectively, And then the next person, they could say, well, you know what, do I want it or not? Yeah, you know what, I wouldn't say no to this skull over here. Again, you've got to go adjacent. I'm going to bid with a 7, and then it just carries on until eventually everyone except one person has passed. So there's kind of like a movement around this grid as opposed to just picking one tile. The one that you start the bid on isn't necessarily the one that gets won at the end of the round, or the end of the phase, I guess. And when you win the tile, you basically leave your marker there because some objectives in the game actually score based on the patterns you leave behind. You take the tile, it will score points in various ways, like points for unique sets, points for getting loads of the same, points for getting certain amount of mushrooms, like 2 mushrooms are 0 points, 3 mushrooms are 13, that kind of weird stuff, and some other effects besides. But for the people who lost, it's not necessarily all over, because if you've already won, your markers go back anyway. But if you lost, you have the opportunity to put your marker on this sprite board here. And essentially what this is that you'll have tokens on here that go in descending order. So for example, if I put a 6, it could be at the top. Green puts in a 3, pushes the 2 down. Then I put a 1 down here. Green decides I'm going to leave behind a 5. So we budge these ones down and fit the 5 in here. And they get kicked off the end if need be, and it scales by player count. But the idea is when the round ends, which is basically when all the tiles here have been nabbed, or everyone's passed, then you go in order from high to lowest, and you get the choice of the tiles on here. So there's more tiles for you to potentially get by using tokens that you lost a phase with. So there's something for winning and something for losing. Now, the effects, as I say, they're pretty standard. I mean, this feathers, you get loads of points for getting lots of feathers. Eggs, you compare who's got the most eggs, and then they're worth points based on who had the most eggs. Mushrooms are specific. Skulls are just flat victory points. but also they provide symbols like the skulls and the plants, where you can basically fulfill these concoction cards, which are basically just get the symbols and you get the points. So another way to score points there. You've got some objectives each round, so you've got 3 Twilight ones to begin with, which there's quite a good variety in the box. And then when you rinse and repeat for round 2, you've got some different end of game scoring goals that were revealed, so you've got a nice bit of variety there. You've also got a player power that you can use once per game. The fact that they put this in as advanced mode just beggars belief. I mean, for crying out loud, it's a really straightforward power you use once in the game, and then you flip it over, you lose 2 points. Who cares? You're going to end the game with like about 80 to 100 points anyway. And it's like, why would you not use the ability? It's not really advanced, people. I mean, technically, there is a family mode that you can play in this game, and it's like, well, just play the family mode then if you don't want to use the advanced power. It just seems weird. But you know, other than that, the rest of the game, and the shadow tokens, that you have these big blue ones here, when you finish the round, if I've got any of my spell tokens left, then you go from highest to lowest amongst all the players, and you replace your lowest tokens with these big ones, like 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Normally your tokens go 1 to 7 max, and you have like an automatic win veto token. So for round 2, to get like 10, 9, and 8 leaves you with some very powerful tokens, but they don't give you any points for controlling areas on the board or anything for objectives. So that's kind of like the stick of the game. You play 2 rounds in the same fashion. Empty out the tiles, round 1's done. Change the goals, distribute out the shadow tokens and take what's off here, and then rinse and repeat for round 2. New set of tiles, same sort of thing, and then count up the points. As you can tell, this one definitely is a step up above Cascadia in terms of complexity. It's not the most complicated game ever, although Cascadia is not that difficult to learn from the rulebook. This is a little bit flaky. I found this one a little bit tricky to understand some of the points. So much so that I actually got a couple of rules wrong in the first multiplayer game that we had. The setup's fine, but it talks about 2 bits in particular which don't make sense from the rulebook, at least not easily. One is these concoction cards. If you skim the rulebook too quick, you'll basically read it as being that you score the highest of the 2 values here, depending on which of those banners you get. But then you realise, oh wait, the book scoring example basically has it as, oh I see, if I get the 2 at the top I get that many points, and if I'm also able to get the bottom row I get the higher of the 2 values then? Is that right? It's a little kind of weird and flaky. The other thing is that there's a rule in here called corner cutting, or what do they call it? They call it corner something. Corner casting, where is it? After you corner cast. Corner cast is just basically, because you've got to go adjacent to these tokens that you flip down, you can basically have a situation where, let's say, for example, like this one's already occupied, this one's already occupied, and then somebody comes along and wins this one. It creates a situation where there's a tile where if you bid on it, nobody can go adjacent to it. So it's basically an auto win, hence corner cast. And this basically allows you to basically stick your lowest token possible on it, win an easy tile, but then the turn order shifts. That is also explained quite shakily in the rulebook, and trying to describe it to players is a little bit flaky as well. I found that there was a few people that tripped up over certain ways that the rulebook phrased stuff, and there's a couple of other FAQ moments that the book does not explain. For example, there's a tile here that copies one of your other items at the end of the game. Now, it doesn't copy symbols, fine. It copies the type, fine. I need another of this mushroom, I need another skull. Okay, there's reasons you would want to do that. It doesn't say you can't copy things like runestones and cursed chests, which allow you to draw cards or tiles from a face-down stack. But if you do this at the end of the game, is that allowed? Do you copy the -1 point on it? Do you instantly trigger the draw free stack when you do it? Why would you do it? It doesn't say you can't, but it's such a weird rule that one that should be explained. It's not a terrible rule book. But I do think some aspects are a little flaky, and compared to something like Cascadia, you're not going to easily grasp everything in here. There are a few things that kind of trip you up. Now, that being said, the game is reasonably good looking. I mean, the artwork is kind of wasted. Yes, it's Beth Sobel, but, you know, much like in Cascadia, it's not really showcasing her artwork except on the cards. Well, here it's the same thing. These tiles don't really show off stellar artwork that Beth's known for. The best artwork is frankly on the box, and these character cards, of which there's 4 of them. You know, so it's not exactly showcasing a lot. Everything else in here is kind of basic and standard, but you do get a lot of tiles, so you are getting some bang for your buck. Now, as much as I've said a few negatives there, the positives are still pretty sweet. This one does have a nice amount of tactics in it. It's not really a strategic game. Yes, you can sort of go, oh, I'm going to try and collect these mushrooms, or I want to try and get a bunch of feathers. But there's a lot of tactical opportunism that you've got here, because there's obviously trying to win a tile. But then the way that you bid on these tiles with alternating these tokens is like, well, where do I start my bid? If I want to win a tile that's down here, perhaps I should start up there and hope it sort of coaxes deck down. But then obviously if you start bidding on these tiles and somebody knows you're gunning for feathers, for example, and it's like, well, hang on, I better head off in that direction so that we're not going anywhere near the feathers. And then it's like, are they willing to bid higher in order to get it back round? So there is an element of what tile you want, but also an element of hate drafting against other players, particularly when there's 4 of you. Also, the fact that you have this board where you actually sometimes want to lose a round. You're thinking, you know what, I'm going to put in a high one, I'm going to put in a 5 here, but I'm hoping that you'll outbid me, because I reckon you really want the tile next to it. You can have that tile, but then I'm going to put my 5 up here, kick out these ones, and then suddenly I've got like first dibs for tiles that I actually want later on. And then even then, you could win a tile for every token you've got, but you might be like, well, you know what? That's only getting me a couple of points. I don't desperately need an egg. I'm not likely to win it. So I'd rather hold back and pass, because that way I now get the shadow tokens for next round, and so my round 2 can be more powerful than my round 1. There's just a lot of little nuances in here that's really cool from a decision-making perspective, and from, you know, a fact that each round plays out very tactically. Now, this does have a knock-on effect in a negative way. This is not a game you want to play with AP players. Oh my god, especially with 4 of you. 4 people gets a little bit chaotic on the grid, as well as makes the game very long, and AP player will destroy this game, because there's a lot of things for you to consider about where you start, how much you bid, what players are after you, what tokens they've got, what tiles they want, what tiles you want, whether you want to go on this board. There's a lot to consider, and people will freeze up. It's definitely a couple of steps above Cascadia in terms of that complexity level, which then beggars belief that this game dares to put a 30 to 45 minute time frame on here. 30 to 45 minutes is fine if you're playing this solo and maybe with 2 players. 30 to 45 minutes with 3 to 4 players is pretty much damn near impossible if you're going to include a teach, because you got a fair amount to teach with some of these rules. As I said, the book makes it a little bit flaky, but man, I mean, I've had a 4-player game of this take, you know, at least an hour, if not an hour and 15 minutes to play. You're going to play Nocturne easily for twice as long as you play Cascadia. You know, it is a bigger time sink. And when it does take that upper end of the time scale because of the decision making that people can freeze up on, it does outstay its welcome. It really does need to be a game that's done and dusted in 45 minutes. And you can do that solo and 2-player, 3 barely, 4 no chance in hell. And so this isn't a game I want to pull out with 4, especially as the bidding around this grid gets a little bit insane with 4. Now, solo, I actually think might be the best way to play this game, because solo plays out pretty much the same. You do your turns as normal, but the AI has a deck of cards, and you flip it over, and depending on what it says on here, it will try to outbid you, it will tell you which direction to go, so it plays in a slightly unpredictable fashion compared to a human player. But still, you have to be wary as to, is it likely to outbid you? Will it not? Will it go on the sprite board? It's done very easy. You can pilot this with no trouble at all from this little mini deck. But you can game the system a little bit, because you can coax like some of those corner casting things that I mentioned before, but also when you see what tokens they've got and what, you know, they don't score for tiles, you know, you're trying to score yours, you can try to almost sort of game the AI into certain positions, you know, in order to benefit yourself. So it's not entirely a random luck fest. There's still a cool little puzzle that you're trying to do, and of course when you play this solo, it's pretty quick. Also, like Cascadia, you've got these scenarios at the back of the book that you can play with different setups for the objectives and what character you have, so easy, normal, medium, for the achievements, exactly like Cascadia has, which, to be honest, the solo mode in Cascadia is fantastic. Solo mode in here is pretty damn good as well. These scenarios make solo, you know, fun to play. So, Nocturne is a solid game, but it's definitely a couple of steps below the likes of Cascadia. Cascadia is a gateway game. This is most certainly not a gateway game. You know, this is for light. This is a light game, but there's a lot of things that could trip up people or force the AP player to think way too much about what they're doing on their turn. And, you know, 30-45 minutes is touch and go at the best of times. It's, you know, it's certainly going to require more of a rules teach. The book doesn't make it easy in that respect on certain aspects. So this one feels like it grinds its gears a bit more than Cascadia did. I know I said that they are two very different games, but I'm just trying to give you an idea in terms of, you know, weight and complexity and, you know, smoothness. This one is a fun game with a decent amount of tactics involved, you know, a little bit of strategy in there, but it's also just that little bit more clunky than I would like from a light game. And, you know, it makes me not want to play this with too many players. If anything, I mainly want to play it as a solo game, but then when I've got something like Cascadia and that, I'm kind of like, well, maybe I'd rather just play that one. It's hard to tell. So it's got its place, but I don't think it's an amazing game. I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. I still recommend it. I think it's a good game, but that's as high as I can really go. You know, it diminishes a little bit at the highest of player counts, and you could almost maybe bump it up a notch if you want to only play this solo, but it kind of averages out a bit like a 7 out of 10. It's good, but I don't want to bring this one out anywhere near as often as some other games that I might do. You know, the theme is completely non-existent, you know, casting spells, whatever, it's bidding tokens for tiles, and whether you've got your tokens and a pattern might score you points for objectives. It's like, whatever. The concoctions is literally just collect symbols, so, you know, nothing about this is thematic at all. It's just got some cool little tactical things, which is what brings this up to something like at least a, you know, deserving of a seal. But I do wish it was just a bit shorter, a bit smoother, a little less clunky. You know, those bits do hurt it. 7 out of 10, still solid. But yeah, if you're going to put the two in front of me, Cascadia is no contest. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. I think it went a bit long for a speed review, but never mind. Don't forget to thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. Let me know your thoughts. Do you think this is a game for you? If you played both, do you prefer one or the other? You know, do you share the thoughts or not? Let me know also what you think of all the other Essen content that I'm going to be doing over the next couple of months. There's plenty to come. Trust me on that one. Take care, and remember, regardless of whether you believe you're a fox mystic or not, let's face it, you really won't, it's still only a game, so bye for now.